Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today I'm going to be doing a bit of a personal history vlog in which I talk about my history of handheld games, and also in the comments feel free to list your history of handheld games. So where did I begin? When did I first develop a fascination with handheld gaming? Well, this began back when I was about 6 years old, and my brother for his birthday received a Game Boy Color. Now, at this point I had been primarily playing games on the PC. These were really basic games, things like the Tweenies, really childish games. And my brother got this Game Boy Color and it had a few games on it, but I was just impressed, blown away by the fact that the experience you could get on the PC, you could also get just in your hands. I could walk around the house with it, I could go out with it, long car journeys, I could just carry it through the car. That very idea to me was amazing. So for my birthday I asked for a Game Boy, and it turned out my brother had actually received an out-of-date Game Boy, because at the time the latest Game Boy was the Advanced SP, and that is what I received, and God was it amazing. I had so much fun with it. There were amazing games. I think I'd have to say my favourite were the Pokemon games. So I had, at the time it was Ruby and Leaf Green. Also, something we just take for granted now, but the fact the screen was backlit so it lit itself up. That was unheard of before. So the previous Game Boy, you had to shine a light on it to play it, because there was no light. There was a screen but no light coming through. So you couldn't play it in the dark, but now you could play it in the dark, and that basically is asking for mischief. Just, when you're meant to go to bed you start playing it. It was great for that. And I remember my mum actually being a bit cautious about that. She thought, oh, I don't want him to be playing that after dark, so she had to take it away from me. So the Game Boy Advance was my handheld device for quite a while. But then I heard about DS, which is kind of like the successor to Game Boy. It was a Game Boy in all but name, at least to me, at the time. And the thing that really caught my eye about that was the fact it could do 3D gaming. But then I heard about another handheld device known as the PSP, and this could do 3D gaming even better. I didn't even know what to call it at the time, the processor. I just knew it was more powerful and could do better. And I received the PSP, and I quite like it, and I'm really impressed with the visuals. But the thing is, the games just aren't quite there. They're not as special as they were in the Game Boy. So then I looked to the DS Lite, this new device that's come out. And it's got a brighter screen, and it looks so elegant. The DS Lite is so well designed, so beautiful. I had the black shiny version. I mean, at the time I didn't know about Apple, but they were like so Apple-esque as we see today. Nintendo don't always make the best looking consoles, but they nailed it with the DS Lite. Appearance aside, the games were great, and yet again I'm playing Pokemon games. I played Pokemon Diamond, a lot of my friends were playing Pokemon Pearl, we did the whole trade thing, and I spent a lot of time on it. I played a lot of games like Mario Kart, etc, all these things, Super Mario Brothers, so much, and the DS Lite was such a great experience. And I think I'd actually call the DS Lite my last great dedicated handheld experience, because after the DS Lite, I move on to the iPod Touch very much by accident, because I go into Blockbuster and they had this giant glass case, and in the glass case you can get these really budget items, these budget gadgets. And the iPod Touch was going for the extremely low price of something like £80, which I guess would be something like $150, $160, something like that. So it's so cheap, so I have to get it. And I get it, and I noticed you can put music on it. That was my primary intention, but I also noticed you can watch YouTube on it, which was excellent and novel at the time. Back then I had to watch YouTube on my desktop, but being able to take it around the house was great. And of course, to make it relevant to what I'm talking about, you could also play games on it. They weren't quite as good as the DS Lite back then by any stretch of the imagination. They were just very basic 3D games. I think we had things like Pocket God and Crash Kart. They were quite good, but they didn't feel fully realised. But as the iPod Touch went along, you could download more and more sophisticated games. But it got to a point with my first generation iPod Touch that the games just began to get laggier and laggier, and I knew that I had to upgrade. So I get this iPod Touch 3rd generation, and it's better, but the thing was, it was more of an upgrade of necessity rather than want. I had to do it. And it was generally the same experience, just a little bit snappier. Also, I happened to get the 32GB model. But then I wanted something a bit more. The problem I had by this point was that the iPod touchscreen was just too small. A lot of the games were becoming very awkward to operate because my thumbs were taking up the whole screen, so I thought I need something a little bit bigger, just a little bit. So I looked to Samsung, who had the Galaxy S2 smartphone, and I think, well, I haven't really been one for smartphones recently, but this is pretty cool. It's a 4.3-inch screen, there's a really fast processor inside, and I'll go with this. But I did not account for two very fundamental issues with doing this. First of all, back then the Google Play or Android store back then barely had any good games on it, so I was limiting myself. It was basically like reverting back to what the iPod Touch was initially. So I had left behind all these great games, and even the ones I did have before I had to repurchase. And another thing was, and this was just a deal breaker, and I'm really frustrated about this, but even to this day, but the Galaxy S2 had a really good processor, but it was also prone to running very hot. So right up by the camera, when you were playing any game that was even slightly intensive, so any 3D game, it would burn. It would burn so badly. And not just like heating up, it was stinging it if you left it too long, and naturally the battery would just die. It would just go away really quickly. So eventually, because I was on contract, I was able to upgrade to the Samsung Galaxy Note 2, which in almost every respect was a perfect phone. Aside from the fact that it just didn't seem to cope with modern games that well, I played, I think it was Asphalt 7, and it was lagging a fair amount, which was really strange because they had advertised it as being a super fast phone that had a quad-core processor, and I was thinking, well, if my phone can't run it, well, what phone can run it? And surprisingly, it was actually a phone I did not think would be able to do it at all, and that was the iPhone 5, because I'd been looking at the iPhone 5 spec sheet, and it basically had a dual-core processor. It was only about 1 GHz, roughly speaking. So compared to this quad-core, roughly 1.5 GHz, it was a joke. You think, well, how can this run anything? But I think I can't profess to know exactly how it does it, but I think it's something to do with iOS being so simple and so undemanding. It can run games super well. And so what I actually ended up doing was taking a second-hand iPhone 5. That's basically what I'm using today. Yes, it's a bit small, which is why I'm looking to the new iPhone actually. But aside from being just a little bit too small, it's actually serving the purpose of being a handheld device perfectly. However, I would say this, of all the devices I have listed, funnily enough, I would say the most pure, most refined and perfect would be the Game Boy Advanced SP. Now that is not to say I would go back to it now, but if I think about at the point in time in which I played with these devices, I think I enjoyed the Game Boy the most. And I think, I have to be honest, probably that's got most to do with the fact it was my first, and also because I was very young, and we tend to look at things through nostalgia goggles, and that's probably why I liked it so much. But that pretty much concludes, up until now, my history with handheld gaming. So as I say, feel free to share your history as well. As always people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.